Now, aside from the President's address, the other big story in Washington has been the visit of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He was there to meet with President Biden and address Congress, an event that neither Joe Biden or Kamala Harris actually attended. And the visit sparked a series of protests. Inside the Capitol, the Prime Minister attacked the protesters.
They stand with Hamas. They stand with rapists and murderers. They stand with people who came into the kibbutzim, into a home. The parents hid the children, the two babies, in the attic, in a secret attic. They murdered the families, the parents. They find the secret latch to the hidden attic, and then they murder the babies. These protesters stand with them. They should be ashamed of themselves.
They should indeed. I caught up with the former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer in California for his take.
Well, I thought he made a very powerful speech, not only in support of Israel and its fight ultimately against Iran, which is what it basically is, but showed great gratitude towards the United States for its support. But it was very disappointing that some of the Democrats, and just the Democrats, decided to boycott his speech. It's partly for party political reasons. They see him as right-wing. And also, of course, they're anxious about making sure they get Muslim votes in the United States at the presidential election. So boycotting the Prime Minister was a way of trying to win support from Muslim voters. But it's a very bad look, actually, and I don't think it did any credit to the Democrats behaving in that way.
Of course, the dominant political story in the US would have been the address to the nation by Joe Biden. We've been waiting a long while to hear from him since he announced his withdrawal from the race for re-election via Twitter. What did you make of his address?
I thought it was a very strange address because he was saying he was standing down as the candidate for the Democrats in order to protect democracy. That was the argument he made, which doesn't make any sense unless you look at it through American eyes, which is that if the Democrats don't win the election, which after all is an exercise, a grand exercise in democracy, then somehow that will be a threat to democracy. It's an extraordinary point to make. And I thought a very divisive point to make because it's divisive to say that if you don't win an election, that's a threat to democracy. It's a strange thing to say. It's a very partisan thing to say. And the speech was for a man who is the president of the whole nation calling for unity. To inject such a divisive and partisan component into the speech. So I thought it was poorly judged myself.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to hear that because that's the paradox that I thought was at the heart of the address, and I mentioned that earlier in the program. There was another aspect to it that I thought was fascinating. It's borne out in this segment. Have a listen.
There is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now.
Now, if he says the time and place for a fresh voice, a younger voice is now, wouldn't he be resigning from the presidency altogether so that Kamala Harris would be sworn in as president rather than saying he's going to stick around for almost 6 months and be president right through to late January?
Well, he's definitely not going to do that. He enjoys the presidency too much to stand down right now. After all, it took a huge effort by the Democratic Party to get him to stand down at all. And when he says it's a time for younger voices, he didn't think that until apparently last weekend when he made the decision to move on. And he made the decision to move on because he was persuaded that he wouldn't be able to win the election. So this is all about whether the Democrats can beat Donald Trump or whether they can't. And he's decided he can't, or others have persuaded him that he can't. So his whole speech was about how you should all get behind Kamala Harris. And I don't know how that will go down with the American people, but it was a very partisan exercise, the whole thing.
Just finally on that, there's a groundswell of support for Kamala Harris. Of course, the media are excited. There's some good polling for her. You'd expect that initially, and she's going to be running to be the first female president of the US. Do you believe that she can sustain this through to November, or will the scales fall from people's eyes?
I think it's a 50-50 proposition, really. It depends what arguments the Republicans are able to make against Kamala Harris. They're going to focus very much on her being left-wing. You know, she was an attorney in San Francisco, which is the most left-wing part of the United States. She was the Attorney General of California, ditto, very left-wing part of the United States. And so the Republicans will target her left-wing views and her left-wing record, and we'll see how that plays out. I mean, obviously, a lot of the population don't like Donald Trump's vulgarity, and that's the negative for him. But I think it's a 50-50 proposition, really. I mean, the Democrats are running the line that she's a woman and she's a woman of colour. Whether voters care too much about that, I doubt that's going to be a winning argument. In the end, in politics, it's a battle of ideas, not a battle of your race or a battle of your gender. And so I suspect she'll have to come up with strong policies in order to win.
Fascinating times ahead as ever. Thanks so much for joining us, Alexander.
It's a pleasure, Chris.